the link to our YouTube channel in the chat function towards the end of the gig, so you can all have a look at it and see all the million of other gigs we've done. We're over the 100. It's basically my lockdown diary, of which Beth is one of them. Beth, that was a lovely chat you had with Kim. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I loved it because I was doing nothing in lockdown and it was so nice to talk to someone.
That's right. That's right. So, but that was a pre-record, I remember. But now listen, so my name is Ben. I am owner of Our Bookshop. I am going to disappear in a minute. Your job as an audience, please, is to send in your best questions. I've already had a few crackers, and thank you to those people who sent emails in. So you'll see a Q&A function along the bottom. Please use that, and I will then field those to Claire and indeed Beth, if you're a big fan of Saving Missy. And I will come. So I'm going to leave you now. I will be sending a few messages to remind everyone. But let me hand over to the wonderful Beth Morrey.
Hello, and hello, Claire.
Hello.
I was going to start by doing your Friday face thing that you do.
Oh,
yes. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. So I've been like practicing selfies. Is that it?
There you go. Very good. Yeah, it's called Book Face Friday.
Book Face Friday. Because I've seen them online and I really enjoyed them. I thought some of them were incredibly clever. I couldn't work out how to do it.
Yeah, it only works. That's the US cover, and it only works for the US cover, obviously, because you need half a face.
Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by doing something that my son always asks me to do. After he's burped, he always says, "Celebrate me." And we're supposed to sort of applaud him and tell him how great he is. Without you burping, I'm going to celebrate you to begin with, and sing the praises of the Authenticity Project, your wonderful debut novel, New York Times best-selling novel, sold in 30 countries, a critical and commercial hit. Publishers Weekly called it beautiful and illuminating. The notoriously difficult to please Kirkus Reviews said it's an enjoyable, cozy novel that touches on tough topics. A Waterstones reader said, Clare Pooley has managed to create that most rare of beasts, a modern day classic. And then I did something that I don't do for my own Amazon reviews because I'm a bit too nervous, but I did it for you. You've got over 5,000 ratings on Amazon, which is just fantastic. And here are a few choice quotes that I found.
Oh dear.
Sorry. I devoured this book like I would a slice of my favourite carrot cake. Someone mentioned Richard Curtis movies. I would be very surprised if this wasn't made into a movie soon. I was picturing who could play the characters as I read it. More on that later. It would make a nice film. This book is an uplifting and life-affirming read. And finally, what really made it for me was I never once stumbled over a sentence, as with many books where words are misspelt. So well done on having a beautifully spelt novel.
Thank you, I'm blushing.
Well, you know, you just like to, it can be difficult as an author because you're expected to hustle and brag about your own achievements and let people know when something goes well. And that can feel kind of awkward and embarrassing. So I think it's quite nice to have someone else do it for you. For a change.
Yes, I really appreciate it.
So to anyone out there who hasn't read the Authenticity Project yet, can you give me your elevator pitch for what it's about?
Oh, well, it's a feel-good novel, really, and it all revolves around a little green notebook, and one of the main characters is an artist called Julian Jessop, who's 79 years old, and he is very lonely. His wife has died 15 years previously, so he gets a little green notebook and he writes on the front the Authenticity Project. And inside, he writes the truth about his life and about how lonely he is. And he leaves that little notebook in a cafe where it's picked up by the owner, Monica, who reads his story and decides to track him down and try and change his life. And she also writes the truth about her life and then leaves the book somewhere else. And this little book is passed between 6 complete strangers who all end up meeting each other in various ways and trying to change each other's lives for the better. So that's it in a nutshell.
And because I quoted for your book, I was delighted to, because I enjoyed it so much. It's just so joyous and gorgeous. But one of the things I did email you separately. I remember emailing you separately to the quote. And the thing that I remember saying is, what really impressed me about it is what you've just described, that kind of one person taking a notebook, writing something, passing it on, and then being passed backwards and forwards in a way. Because what I remember saying to you is the plotting of the book, it's like a swan, in that you don't notice the complexity of how difficult it is to manage all that passing between people and those different storylines interweaving. You're not really aware of it when you read it, but it is complicated and difficult to manage that level of detail interlocking, all those storylines weaving with each other. So
sorry, I've got my dogs just fighting in the background. Hold on a second.
Say hello.
Grab one of them. There we go. Sorry, carry on, Beth.
So what I was going to say about the kind of plotting of something like that, is that something that are you a planner or are you a pantser? Which is it?
Oh, I'm actually somewhere in between, in that when I started writing, I knew what the beginning was, I knew what the middle was roughly, and I knew what the end was, and I knew roughly who the characters were. But I love being able to leave some of it to chance, because I find, I don't know if you do the same, that as you write, you get to know your characters better, and then they sort of start to direct the action. So so it's nice to leave some room for the magic to happen, I suppose. And what I found really interesting is that you find when as you go along, some characters appear that you weren't expecting, and some that you were expecting become irrelevant. And then if you've read the book already, you'll know that right towards the end there's a big twist, and so far, touch wood, nobody I've spoken to has guessed that twist. And I think the reason is because I didn't know that was going to happen either. And it was sort of, as I was writing, I thought, oh my goodness, there's something sort of going on here that I wasn't aware of. And it was only at the point where it happened that it became clear to me that somebody was lying, and the truth wasn't what it appeared at all. And then when I got to the end, like every writer, I went back and rewrote once I had this sort of whole story in my head. So yes, to answer your question, somewhere in between a plotter and a pantser. Actually, if you haven't heard the expression pantser, it sort of means flying by the seat of your pants.
Explain that.
Not a comment on my underwear.
I'm not being rude. I think that, a lot of us do have that halfway house, don't we, that you have to have some degree of control and forethought, but on the other hand, surprising and organic things can happen if you just let your characters breathe, lead you along. And so, talking of those characters, it's quite a big curse to manage. Which character came first for you? I know Julian comes first in the book, but is he the first who you thought of who came to life?
Yes, he was, actually, because he was inspired by a place. So there's the place where he lives, Chelsea Studios, is a real place, and I used to go down the Fulham Road in the number 14 bus and look over the wall into this little sort of studio complex, and it's a little village of artist studios that was built in the 1920s by a sculptor, an Italian sculptor, and he modelled it on his estate in Florence. So it's an extraordinary little place with lots of little cobbled central areas with fountains and all sorts. It's really beautiful. And the rule was that only artists and sculptors could buy or rent one of the studios. And I thought, well, what would have happened if somebody had bought one of those studios in, say, the 1960s, and had lived there ever since, and with the whole of sort of Chelsea and Fulham had changed around them, and yet their world remained exactly the same. And that really was where where Julian came from. It was that sort of it was that that thought that led to Julian.
And when you mention locations, because locations are really important in your book, and I mean, there's Monica's Cafe as well, and I'm interested in whether that firstly, whether that is a real place, Monica's Cafe, or inspired by a real place. But I'm interested in how you do locations, because do you sometimes worry that if you locate something somewhere very specific to the story, that how do you make it resonate for someone who doesn't know that area and doesn't have any links with it? Do you ever think that's a problem, or do you think it is better for keeping that very distinctive sense of place?
Well, firstly, Monica's Cafe isn't real. It's really based on my ideal cafe, because two of my favorite things are cafes and books. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fabulous to have a cafe that had a sort of library in it where people could just swap books over, and sort of and I designed it very much like the ideal cafe in my head. But I think location is almost like a character in a book. It's another sort of it's a character in its own right, and I don't think it matters if you don't know the place. But I think it is. I love it when I read a book to be able to really picture the world I'm in, and even if it's a fantasy world, even if it's Game of Thrones, the location I think is a really sort of crucial part of it. So being able to picture it vividly, I think, is important.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's really interesting because it's done so well in America, that I think it's really interesting, that idea that there's a lot of American people who probably don't have any idea about this area, and yet they've totally bought into it, which I think is a real achievement.
But then I think part of the reason for that is it's it's a city, and there are so many similarities, I think, between cities around the world and city living. And so a lot of the themes, like the idea of loneliness and connection, I think are pertinent to city dwellers wherever they might be. I think they're probably just as relevant to New Yorkers and people living in Tokyo or wherever as they are to Londoners. So I think the city living gives us a link wherever we are in the world.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that notion of authenticity as well, particularly that word, which I want to come to, could be very resonant for Americans as well. I'm really interested in this title because we've talked about titles before, and I now use your sticky word phrase all the time that you gave me, which is that a title should have a sticky word, so that if somebody goes into a bookshop and they can't remember the title, there's one word that they kind of that sticks, so they can say, I don't know, it's that authenticity thing. And I think that's really true, that you do need something to grab hold of. And I want to know where that title came from. Did it come right at the beginning? Did it come in the publishing process? Or
oh God, you know what, the title was the most difficult thing. And I mean, was your title, you've got a different title in the US and the UK, yeah, haven't you?
Had wrangling.
I had no idea how much publishers agonize about titles, and it's the title the very original title was The Book That Changed Lives, but quite quickly I changed it to The Authenticity Project. And funnily enough, as soon as I came up with that title, the whole book gelled in my head in a way it hadn't done before. So the title was quite important for the whole writing process. And then, when it went to publishers, a number of the publishers I spoke to said, oh, not sure about the title, and would you mind changing it? And I said, no, I'm happy to change it if we can come up with something that everybody thinks is better. And we went through hundreds of titles. We wrote I wrote titles, my US publisher wrote titles, my UK publisher wrote titles, my agents wrote titles. I mean, we had a list of over 100 potential titles. And we ended up right back at the beginning with the title we started with. And I mean, their worry about it, and the reason why they were searching for something else is, you know, the word itself, although, you know, I liked its stickiness and the fact that it's, you know, it stands out, it's also a tricky word. You know, it's a word that sort of, you know, yeah, people grapple with, and it's quite difficult to fit on a book cover physically, and also people will worry that it might sound a bit sort of non-fictiony. So you know, you notice in America they always put a novel underneath, so you know, yeah, just to make it clear. So yeah, so it's funny, and actually I'm just at the moment I'm just editing my second novel, and you know, one of the first reactions I got from my publishers was not sure about the title. Oh no, here we go again.
Yeah, familiar experience. So as I said, it's sold in nearly 30 countries, and I'm interested in the covers because they're all the ones that I've seen are so lovely. Apart from the UK and the US, what's your favorite cover?
Oh, there are a lot that are just different versions of the UK and the US.
Like a variation on the same theme.
Yeah. So a number of markets have taken the UK cover and just translated it, and likewise the US cover. But there are a couple of like the Polish cover, for instance, is a gorgeous little cafe scene, and there's a couple of it's the Corsican one, no, sorry, Croatian rather. The Croatian cover is absolutely delightful. Again, it's a sort of, you know, really warm cafe, so out the outside of a cafe with a sort of little figure. So yes, it's fascinating seeing what people do with them, and I think the common link is, you know, they're all very warm, and you know, often focused on sort of cafes and, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, I love seeing all the different covers, and the different translations of my name. I find really interesting.
I think I can't remember what country it was, but my name changed to Beth Morrey over.
Oh, it made, well, mine in Serbia, I didn't realize that in Serbia they spell your name phonetically. So my name is spelled Klerpuli, Clare Pooley, which I love. I think I might change it like by that to that permanently.
Talking of the covers, your American cover changed from hardback to paperback. And I wondered, because that was a really interesting thing, because I mean, actually, just to give it another, I love it, it's so cool.
I've got the paperback here, actually, hold on. There you go, that's the American paperback. So yes, it is quite
great. Yeah. Authenticity is a sticky word visually as well. I mean, I do think you're drawn to that word. But what I want to ask you is, what were you doing when you found out that you were a New York Times bestseller, and how did you react?
I really will never forget it. It was around Christmas time, so it was just after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year. And I was oh no, sorry, it was early New Year, but yeah, so still in the holidays, and I was up in Scotland, and it was bedtime, you know, it was like 10:30, and I was sort of, you know, in my pajamas, I was about to get to bed, and the phone rang. I thought, oh my God, who on earth is ringing at 10:30 at night?
How annoying.
It was a ridiculous thing to do. And I looked at my phone, it was a New York number. I thought, it was a wrong number. You know, I mean, who's calling me from New York at 10:30? And then I thought, you know, the only person who might be calling me from New York would be my publisher. So I picked up the phone, and it was Pam Dorman, my US publisher, who is amazing. And she said, hi, is that New York Times bestseller Clare Pooley? Sorry about the really bad American accent, by the way. It was
I can picture it.
But yeah, so I will never forget that. It was quite a moment.
How fantastic. So just to go back to that Amazon review that mentioned Richard Curtis movies, Are you allowed to tell us, are there any film or TV things in the pipeline, or do you think about, I mean, I know you never think about it. No, you know, you don't think about it, but if you did think about it.
Oh, I do think about it actually, because, you know, when I'm writing, I see every scene visually before I write it, and I play it through in my head like a, you know, like a movie scene before I start writing each section. So I've always sort of seen it visually, and yeah, I would love for it to be a movie or a TV series, and I have sold the rights, but you know, these things are always, it's always such a long shot. Selling the rights doesn't mean it's actually going to happen until it's green lit and everyone's signed on the dotted line, and, you know, it's all ready to start rolling. You know, you can't bet on it. So fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think the plan is a Netflix series.
Oh, that would be so exciting. And in your dreams, can you say who would play Julian?
Oh, Julian is, well, you know what? I didn't think about this as I was writing it, but when I got to the end, I suddenly thought, you know, I know who Julian is. And it was just so obvious. It's Bill Nighy. And I can't imagine it being anyone else, actually. Bill Nighy is to me absolutely Julian. So, and Hazard is Dominic Cooper.
Oh, really? Funnily enough, though, I saw Hazard as much, I mean, no offense to Dominic Cooper, but I think of him as quite short. I see Hazard as quite tall. Am I wrong? Is Dominic Cooper?
Oh, I didn't think he was short. I'm thinking of him in oh no, I'm not, sorry, I'm going crazy. Not Dominic Cooper, Bradley Cooper. Who am I thinking of?
Yeah. No, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. That's who I see as Hazard.
I'm much more with Bradley.
So, yeah.
Great. We're members together of an online writing support group.
Oh yes, the savvy writers.
D20 authors. We go online to angst to each other regularly. Shout out to the D20s. But one of the things that we talk about is the Don't Look, Don't Cry Club, which is about whether you read your own reviews or not. And obviously, when you do read your own reviews, you will see some good ones, but you will also see some bad ones. And there's half of us are kind of in the group that thinks, well, I'm not going to have the pleasure of seeing the good ones so that I never see the bad ones either. And some people embrace all their reviews, no matter what they are. And I want to know what side you come down on.
Oh, it's a good question. I can't stop myself reading reviews, actually. I wish I could, because I'd love to think that, you know, I was confident enough not to care what other people think, but, you know, I do care what people think, and, you know, I do find myself reading reviews, but I've learned 2 tricks that make it okay. And one is if I read a bad review and I'm feeling miserable about it, I immediately look up one of my favorite books of all time, and I look up their 1-star reviews, and I remind myself that even Jane Austen, you know, has unbelievably terrible reviews on Amazon. So, you know, so that's my trick on that front. And the other thing I do on Goodreads, there's a way you can actually click on just your 5-star reviews, so you can just read the good ones, which is again a sort of just a trick.
That's better.
So yeah, so I do read them, but, you know, I mean, sometimes you come across stuff that, you know, so I read this review once, which was for my memoir, The Sober Diaries, and it was on Goodreads, and it was an American lady, and she said, I couldn't read, I had to stop reading this book because Clare Pooley is a racist. And I thought, why on earth, you know, how could she think I'm a racist? What have I done to make her think that? And she carried on writing, and she said she doesn't mention the color of anyone's skin until she refers to her Uber driver, and she makes it clear that he's black. And I thought, I'm sure I didn't do that. And somebody has written underneath, I think you'll find that when she refers to the black cab driver, she's referring to the color of the taxi.
Oh God. You can't please everyone, can you?
No, exactly.
There's that famous Jane Austen review. I think it's of Emma or something, and somebody just put, It's just a bunch of people visiting each other's houses.
Exactly, and that's what we love about Jane Austen.
The joy of a great review is that sometimes you get someone who not just loves your book, but they get exactly what you were planning on doing. So if you come across a review that is like that, what's the thing that people say in reviews that really makes you just go, yeah, that's what I meant?
Oh, I love it when people talk about, so, you know, publishing a book in lockdown was not ideal timing.
Yeah.
But what has been so amazing about it is the number of people who said in the reviews that, you know, they were feeling, you know, finding life really hard and, you know, really difficult. And I had, you know, emails from people like sort of nurses in intensive care saying, you know, how awful their lives had been recently, and that reading the book made them, you know, made them feel more positive about life, and, you know, and more, it restored their faith in humanity, and, you know, and just made them feel happier. And, you know, that just, you know, that made everything feel worthwhile, really. So I love it when people talk about the feeling the book gives them. But I guess the other thing that I love is when people talk about how it's made them think more about the way they portray themselves on social media, for instance. So, you know, there have been a lot of people who say that, you know, having read the book, they do think much more carefully about what, you know, about trying to be more authentic. And, you know, yeah, if it can make people think more about how they live their lives, then, you know, that would be an amazing thing to achieve, really.
Yeah, and a lot of I've noticed a lot of your Amazon reviews have readers saying that what they'd really like is a sequel to or the how do you feel about that? Do you think that you'd ever go there?
You know, I left, without giving any spoilers away, you know, I left it open at the end of the book for a sequel, but I'm not planning on writing one yet. I sort of feel like I needed to give those characters a rest for a while and do something completely different. So the book that I'm editing at the moment is a completely different set of characters, although there are a couple of little cameos in it, for which if you hadn't read The Authenticity Project, you wouldn't notice, obviously, but if you have, you would, yeah, they might make you smile.
You put in some Easter eggs.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And to go back to your sober diaries for a second, which was also incredibly successful about giving up alcohol. How would you describe that difference between writing fiction and non-fiction? And do you think in the future you might write more non-fiction, or are you now settled in fiction?
You know, they're not as different as I thought they would be. So I started writing non-fiction as therapy, really, because when I quit drinking, like Hazard, who is, you know, an aspect of me, really, I quit drinking, gosh, 6 years ago now. And I was too ashamed to talk to anybody in real life about what I was going through. So I started writing a blog instead, and I called it Mummy Was a Secret Drinker. And I poured out, you know, all my angst onto this blog. And that was, you know, that was my, you know, that was my therapy. And then I, you know, and when I started writing fiction, I didn't realize how much I used that as therapy also, you know. So, you know, so in a way it's you know, with non-fiction or memoir, certainly you're pouring your whole life onto the page, and it's very exposing and very sort of you know, it can be quite traumatic. And with fiction, you feel like you're one step removed, you know, you're actually exploring often the same sorts of issues but through the eyes of somebody else. So it gives you a whole freedom, but it still allows you to look at the things that you question and the things that bother you and issues that, you know, you find important. So yeah, so there are a lot more similarities than I thought.
I agree, and it's sometimes when you're writing, it can kind of give you a glimpse of what your subconscious is obsessed with.
Yes, exactly.
I just said I'm obsessed with motherhood and trees and also cake. Say, what runs through your writing, do you think? What's the thing that you just can't help?
Oh, I mean, I explored the issue of addiction, you know, obviously, and you know, and I find addiction in different guises often appears in my writing. So not just addiction to alcohol, but addiction to social media, you know, and that sort of thing. I find the idea of connection is something that keeps coming up in my novels. And, you know, I find it strange that we are connected to thousands of people around the world now virtually, and yet so many of us feel lonely, and actually what we're really missing is real life connections. So I find exploring those real life connections really important. And I think, you know, again, like you, motherhood, you know, often crops up, and one that I'm really exploring a lot in the next novel, which comes through a bit in the Authenticity Project as well, is age and ageism. You know, what I find, it makes me very angry the way that people get to a certain age and are made to feel less relevant in society, and so ageism is a big one for me at the moment.
And can you give us a little glimpse of book 2? What are you allowed to tell us about it?
Oh, well, I can't tell you the title. But I can tell you that it's the inspiration for it is my fascination with commuters. So I find it, you know, I find it really interesting how you can get a group of people who take the same bus or same train to work every day and back. And see the same people, and yet nobody ever talks to each other, because that's, you know, because we're British and we don't do that. But you make all sorts of assumptions about those other people. And so what I started thinking about was what would happen if an event occurred that meant that a group of people who were commuted together got to know each other, and what might happen then. So it's set on a train, and it's yeah, so it's about a group of people that meet on a train, and they're, again, 5 main characters, and they all have their different issues, and yeah, and yeah, title TBC.
Well, we'll have a quick brainstorm. We'll sort it.
Yeah, the working title is The Wisdom of Carriage H, but apparently in America they don't have carriages, which confuses things a bit.
Also, Carriage H immediately makes me think of Line of Duty, and I think, oh my God, is it a
clue? Oh, H, yeah.
You used to work in advertising, didn't you?
Yes, I did, for nearly 20 years, actually.
It just strikes me that, well, I don't know, I never worked in advertising, but isn't that quite a good, somehow it feels like a really good training ground for being an author?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually part of the reason why I'm obsessed by the idea of authenticity comes from my advertising days, because advertising was all about, you know, blurring the sort of, you know, the distinction between truth and reality. I mean, reality and fiction. So I guess it sort of comes from there. But yeah, I think, I mean, my American publisher said, when, you know, she said to me, what do you do? And I said, oh, I used to work in advertising. And she said she could tell from my writing, because I tend to write in a very pared down way, you know, so I get to the point quite quickly. And, you know, advertising is all about sort of being able to distill things into a very sort of, you know, into sound bites and nuggets. And I guess that's, you know, that is the way I write. I don't write sort of, you know, lots of flowery prose, you know, that's not my style. And, you know, I think also, you know, advertising is very helpful in terms of, you know, thinking about, you know, your audience, you know, your target audience. What is it that people sort of, you know, are interested in? What are those things in the zeitgeist that we're all sort of, at the moment, we're all fascinated by?
And then channeling that into an accessible story.
Yeah, you hope so.
There's a history of really famous writers, and I now can't think of her name. Is it Faye somebody?
Faye Weldon,
Yeah.
Faye Weldon worked at the same agency as me, actually. So she's very famously ex-advertising, and oh gosh, there've been all sorts.
Was that from that one advertising agency? I think there were a few who came through. So there's a precedent.
James Herbert was in the same agency, and James Patterson, who's a multi-billion sort of bestseller in the US. So advertising is there's lots of frustrated artists and novelists in advertising.
One of our regular interviewers, Jamie Fury, he still works in advertising as a copywriter.
Yeah.
There's quite a few. Thank you all for your questions. Beth, Claire, you're doing a fantastic job. Loving this, and you get lots of lovely comments. And we can crack through a few questions. Beth, keep chipping in with your own as well. This is from Jill, Claire, and Beth. Really enjoying the event. Thank you. I'm only a few pages into Authenticity Project. Picked up my copy today. I already feel that I'd like to visit the area, and in particular Brompton Cemetery, if it does exist. Very quick question. Is Emmeline Pankhurst's grave really there?
I've been asked this a few times, because actually I've had messages from a couple of people who have been all around Brompton Cemetery trying to find the Admiral's grave. And the truth is it doesn't exist. Although there is a gravestone that it's based on. So there is a gravestone that is exactly as I imagined the Admiral's grave, but the inscription on it is different. So I made up the inscription.
Whose is that? Do you know? Can you remember?
Sorry, the actual inscription on the.
No, whose is the actual grave?
It's really faded, so you can't read it anymore. But the gravestone, actually, if you look at my Instagram page, there is a picture of the grave that the Admiral's grave is based on. And actually I can post it on Twitter as well tomorrow for anyone who's interested. And it's right by the south entrance, and it's beautiful, and it's sort of it's at the right height. It's at that height that can be a table, and you can also just perch your bum on if you're having a drink. So yeah.
If I'm clever, I might even get it up on here and share it in a moment. Let's get another question in, and then I'll carry on searching. Margaret Baxter, Margaret's always good for a great question. So she's one of my regulars, as you can probably tell. I'm enjoying listening to your lovely ladies, and I love both Saving Missy and Authenticity Project. Which authors have influenced you in your writing? This is going to be a question for both of you. So Claire, you go first.
Gosh, so many. I mean, I read very broadly, and I read all types of different writing. So I read from very commercial right through to sort of very literary. And I think so my influences range from Jilly Cooper on one hand, who I love for all her characterization and her humor, and the way her world of Rutshire, if you remember where those books were all set, I think is very like the sort of world I wanted to create around Fulham. And also at the other end of the spectrum, there's sort of Armistead Maupin, who wrote Tales of the City, which I loved for the way that they created connections between random disparate people in cities. And again, that was sort of something I think that influenced my writing. And another actual big influence is Bridget Jones, so and I think she was the sort of first time I read a book and thought, gosh, this is me. And I think she really sort of influenced me wanting to be a writer myself. So those are three of, I mean, there are so many more, but those are three of my big influences. How about you, Beth?
I absolutely agree with you on Jilly Cooper. I think she helped me learn how to write dialogue, because all her characters have pin sharp kind of speech patterns that help you know exactly what they're like. I just think she's the master of that. And then I'd probably choose Nick Hornby.
Yes.
I love his style of writing being really, really pared down, and it seems straightforward, but it isn't. And then finally, just for kind of depth of detail and humor, Sue Townsend.
Oh yes,
They were
yeah,
on the
absolutely.
books, and I just love them.
Yeah.
What we've
No,
skirted over is the fact that you both know each other socially. And I have to say, when I asked, I had Claire's book, I saw Beth on the cover with a quote, and so I just thought, let's go for that. And turns out they both dog walk together. They both went to college together. They're just
well, we weren't at college at the same time. I'm a fair bit older than Beth, sadly, but, but we were at the same one.
Fantastic. Right, let's go with another question. An easy one, actually. Well, when will the new book be out, Claire?
Oh, it actually is not as easy as all that, because whilst I know it's going to be out next year, 2022, I don't know when, I'm afraid. So yes, that's still
No
TBC.
problem. In fact, Beth, just quickly, what are you working on for the next book, and when's that going to be out?
I've just handed in book 2, maybe final draft-ish. I don't know. I daren't say that because it feels like a jinx. And I think it's out in February next year, I think.
Good. Well, do it.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one. Can I have a proof when it's when it's we'll
do another proof swap.
Yeah, exactly.
We can do an event at the bookshop, physical, real event.
I can't even imagine that anymore.
Oh, it'd be so nice to see people. I know hugs. I miss hugs.
Let's jump down to the most recent question. For the Netflix series, who would play Monica and Alex? I love the book so much.
I still haven't got Monica cast in my head. Claire Foy, I thought maybe. But no, I'm not entirely sure, and likewise Alice. So anyone who's got any ideas, do pitch them in my direction.
And Olivia also, she's rattled off a few questions here. What inspired the Authenticity Project? I can't remember if Beth asked that sort of question, but was there a moment of inspiration?
You know what, it was very much inspired by my own experience, because if you looked at my life 6 years ago before I quit drinking, on the outside it looked like it was all perfect, and the sort of my social media feeds were all sort of happy and and curated and all that sort of thing, and the reality was very different, because I was struggling with this addiction that was sort of causing me all sorts of mental and physical harm, and yet nobody knew about that. And that when I told the truth about my life in my blog and then in the memoir, The Sober Diaries, it transformed my life, but it also helped transform the lives of thousands of people who read it. And that really got me thinking, well, if telling the truth about your life can make these amazing magical things happen, what might happen if other people did the same? And that was really the inspiration for the idea. But actually, interestingly, although I told the truth about my life in a blog, I was fascinated by the idea of somebody doing the same thing in a old-fashioned notebook, because I don't know about you, but I find handwriting really fascinating, because you so rarely see it these days. Everybody types everything, and and the only thing you ever see handwritten is maybe a shopping list. And I think if you were in a cafe and you saw a book where somebody had written inside in their own handwriting, it would be very difficult not to pick it up and read what they'd written, wouldn't it?
Very much so, very much so. Louise asked, do you think you will write a sequel to The Sober Diaries? Really resonated for her. She recently gave up drinking herself, so I would love to understand how things change when you're 6 years down the line. Is that an option?
Thank you. I don't think I would write a sequel to The Sober Diaries, and the main reason is my kids, actually, because when I wrote The Sober Diaries, my eldest child was 11, and now my youngest is 12, my eldest is 17, and I think children get to the age where the idea of their parents talking about them and their lives, which I would have to, because that's all part of my life, is mortifyingly embarrassing, and I don't think they would ever forgive me. So I think I'm much safer now sticking to fiction. And also, you know, although it's really hard writing about the hardest time of your life, that's the most interesting bit for other people. You know, I think, you know, if I was to write something now about how generally happy I am, I think it would just be, you know, it wouldn't be as interesting to read, sadly. But to answer your question about, you know, how is life 6 years down the line, it's funny, you know, what the most extraordinary thing for me now is I just don't think about alcohol. You know, I go to a party and I don't notice who is drinking and who isn't drinking. It doesn't even cross my mind that I might have a drink myself. And that, for somebody who was so obsessed with alcohol for so long, is such a revelation. And the impact of that is that, you know, I have not just more physical time because I don't have hangovers anymore. I'm not, you know, I'm not under par in the same way that I used to be quite frequently. But also I have so much more headspace. So, you know, I'm able to achieve things that I was never, you know, I would never have achieved if I was still drinking. I would never have published 2 books in 6 years and written a third if I was drinking. I wouldn't have even got halfway through one. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
No, very good. Smashed out of the park, absolutely. Helen Paris, I know she's got a book coming out very soon. Delighted to listen to authors who write so beautifully about the succor of community speaking. What a beautifully written question. With such generosity to each other. Claire, what are the joys and challenges fiction provided after writing memoir and blog? This is a very, very author question for another author, isn't it?
I mean, I think the joy of fiction after having written non-fiction is, you know, you have endless scope. You can go anywhere you like. You know, you're not tied to your own experience. But you know, that also makes it harder because, you know, suddenly you have to make stuff up, you know, and, you know, so yes, I think it's equally sort of, you know, easier and harder. And, you know, I love it. I mean, if you'd asked me when I was a child what I wanted to be when I grew up, you know, my answer would be, I want to write books. You know, my kids say to me, you know, Mummy, when I talk about my job, they say, Mummy, making up stories is not a proper job. and in a way, they're right. It isn't a proper job because it's so, you know, it's such a joy and a privilege, but it's also really hard, you know. And I think for me, I don't know, Beth, I'd love to hear what your hardest thing is, but for me, the hardest thing is having to retain the self-belief that what you're writing is okay for the amount of time it takes to write a novel. You know, it takes several months to write a first draft, you know, say 6 months. And, you know, to enable yourself to go through producing 90,000 words, you know, over that period, you know, you have to believe that what you're writing is okay. And that can be really hard sometimes. You know, you go through this roller coaster of emotions. One day you think, you know, it's brilliant, I'm a genius. And the next day you think, nobody is ever going to want to read a single word I've written, it's all rubbish. So that for me is a hard thing, is retaining that confidence and self-belief. What about you, Beth?
Yeah, I think I was going to ask you, I never got round to that, but one of my questions was, it felt a bit of a downer, was what's the worst thing about being an author? And I think what you just described very well is both the worst and the best thing about being an author is that you get to sit and write. And sometimes you will write your way into something that excites you and you don't really know where it came from and it feels amazing. And that's the best. But then sometimes you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is awful. Why did I write this? Nobody would ever want to read it. And that roller coaster just keeps going. And from what I gather from other writers I know, it never ends.
No, I don't think it does.
Saying to yourself, I don't know how to do this.
Rowena Dean, what is the dog doing with her shoes? Your questions need to get better than that one. I don't,
You know what? I can hear my dog chewing something. I think he's chewing my son's trainer in the background, so I'm trying to ignore it. I did, before we started this, I did say to my husband, can you make sure the dogs are quiet? And, you know, he's just ignored them. He's downstairs, you know, doing something else, regarding leaving the dogs running riot.
You haven't even watching.
No,
he won't be watching this, will he? I'm just seeing if
I always put dogs in my books, actually, and there's, you know, in the Authenticity Project, there's a dog called Keith, you know, who Julian adopts, and it's fascinating the number of people who have sent me a message saying, you know, having read the book, you know, what happens to Keith. And at the end of when the UK paperback came out, I added a PS to the end of the acknowledgements, explaining what happens to Keith. So if anybody is wondering, if you look at the back of the acknowledgements, there is an explanation there.
Is there a dog in book 2?
Yes, there is a dog in book 2. Is there a dog in your book too?
Yeah, but minor role.
No, you've got to give them more role.
There's a cat in book 2, has a bigger role.
My US publisher said, Claire, you can never have too much sex or too much dog. and I can't write sex scenes again because of my kids. So I put dogs in instead.
Those of you who may not have read Beth's book, I've just put a link to Getting Saving Missy. There's a dog in it, as you can probably tell. This is a good question, actually, which I was on my mind. Olivia then jumped in with it. Did your kids read the Authenticity Project? You've got a 17-year-old, have you say? So
yeah.
Has he or she read either of those 2 books?
Yeah, they've all read the Authenticity Project and the Sober Diaries as well, actually, because with the Sober Diaries, I didn't want anyone to ask them a question about it that they weren't, you know, they didn't know the answer to, you know, and I didn't think it was fair that other people knew stuff about me that they didn't. So we all listened to that as a family and as an audio book when we were on a long drive somewhere, and I sort of said, no, you can ask me anything you like. Yeah, the Authenticity Project, my eldest was one of my very best first readers, because she's very good at saying exactly what she thinks, but in a way that doesn't upset me, because I guess because she's my own child, I can't sort of completely throw my toys out of the pram when she tells me she doesn't like something. So she's able to critique in a way that I can sort of take, whereas when my husband tries doing it, I end up throwing things at his head. So yeah, my eldest daughter is probably my best first editor.
This has cropped up in conversation with other authors when I'm interviewing them, and I think certainly the female authors have turned around and said that the husband's job is just to like it, and there's nothing. Beth, does Tom like your books?
You know what? I can't stand other people. I can't stand other people reading my book, apart from, I mean, I can't even stand my editor, and it's so embarrassing. But he and my dad probably are the only 2 people I would show it to, and he's very good. He's really good at zeroing in on the thing that's not working, or so he's not that I like to compliment him too much, but he's extremely good at stuff like that.
Good. Well, he's a clever man, isn't he? He's very funny. I'm a big fan of his as well. I've just put a link to our YouTube channel where you'll be able to catch this event, probably in a day or 2 when I post it. But let's have another question. Olivia, I don't quite understand this question, but what atmosphere do you get into before you start writing? Is there a certain mood or a certain thing you've got to do? Are there moments where you just can't start writing at all?
Well, you know, I have a very set sort of routine for writing new stuff. So if I'm editing, I can edit at pretty much any time of day. It doesn't matter. But if I'm writing new material, I have to do it first thing in the morning, because that's when the world is quiet and I'm not disturbed by thoughts of other things I should be doing, or, you know, sort of, you know, other things going on. So often what I do is I'll wake up ridiculously early, about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'll write the scene that I'm on that day in my head while I'm still half asleep, because I find that way you can, your subconscious, comes to the fore, and you can come up with all sorts of really fascinating things that you would never have thought of in the normal part of the day. So I sort of write the scene in my head before I even get out of bed, at a ridiculously early hour in the morning, and then I go down to the kitchen, which is where I work, and I sort of bash out that scene while it's still fresh in my head, and then I come back to it later and reread it and edit it and make it sort of better. So, but it's, if I'm doing something new, it has to be really early in the morning. And I don't. What about you, Beth? Do you have a sort of set time or set way of?
Well, I was thinking, is it Olivia who asked the question?
Yes.
I was thinking that Edna O'Brien talked about how she would just wait and wait and wait for the electric charge before she wrote, that she wouldn't write until she had that charge.
Well, she could be there forever.
Well, I remember thinking that, like, what a luxury to be able to wait that long. But I kind of know what Olivia means, and I kind of know what Edna O'Brien means, in that sometimes I would just start to write. And I agree with you that I'd have to have quiet for writing new material, but I would just start to write at any time, whenever, and I would hope that eventually I would write my way into the charge. And if I don't, then, well, I might be able to use something. I love the early morning thing. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, I don't think I could. I couldn't write late at night. I mean, it just wouldn't work for me. Whereas some people only write late at night. So yeah, I think it just depends on the way your imagination works, I guess. But the time it's best is when, talking about that charge thing, the time it's best is when and it doesn't happen often, but it's when you feel that it's not even you doing the writing. You feel, there's a great book by Elizabeth Gilbert called Big Magic, about the sort of magic of creativity, which is fascinating. And she talks about this as well. It's almost, it's the idea of the muse, the idea that somebody else is writing through you, which sounds really cuckoo, but it does feel like, when it's really working, it feels like that. It feels like it's not you doing it at all. It's something else, someone else. It's strange. Do you ever feel the same?
It perfectly describes it. Occasionally you just get there and it's magical.
Conscious of time, 2 minutes. So first thing I would say is, this is our book of the month. So anyone who did buy the book for this event or through us through the shop, we have a book club meeting on Monday the 3rd of May, and Claire will be joining us, which is very exciting. And Beth, you're very welcome to join as well if you want. But so that will be fun. I'll obviously email everyone the details. Let's have another quick question. Olivia, actually, no, it's Louise's question. I find like Louise, the Authenticity Project would be a great beach read. Do you have any plans to travel, and what would be your favourite beach read?
Oh God, I'm so desperate to travel. One thing I miss the most about lockdown is being able to travel. So yes, I mean, as soon as I can get on an aeroplane and go somewhere, I would love to. In terms of my favorite beach read, one of my favorite authors at the moment is Taylor Jenkins Reid. So and she wrote Daisy Jones and the Six, which was one of my favorite books from 2019, I think it was. And also The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And they're just two brilliant books for sort of, if you're looking for a sort of beach read, holiday read type of thing. And she has a new book coming out any day now. Is it out, or it's not out yet, is it, Ben? Malibu Rising, it's called. So that's the book that I would take with me on holiday.
Beth, what's your beach read?
Well, like Claire, I'm a big fan of Julie Cooper, so I'd take Julie Cooper's best novel, which is Rivals, factually. But I guess this summer there's a new book out called The Summer Job by Lizzie Dent, about a woman who tries to fake it as a sommelier.
Yes.
And it's just such a riot. It's really good fun. So that would be a good beach read, I think.
Lovely. Lovely. Listen, all good things have to come to an end. Thank you all for your questions. And sorry to those who I didn't get round to them, Louise and Olivia. I might wanted to Lauren. Kate, sorry, Kate. I do know Kate. So, Claire, thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to. I haven't read the book myself, so I've got to before the 3rd of May. I've got to get it read as well. And
well, I hope we haven't given you too many spoilers, Ben.
No. You've been really good, and actually, a lot of the audience saying, "Well, I've just started it," or "I'm just, just halfway through or something." So I think the detail guys get it read, frankly. So you've got until the 3rd of May, and you'll obviously get an email from me about the book club meeting. And whilst you're at it, read one of our previous books of the month, which was Saving Missy, which is out in paperback now. I did send you the link on the chat if you want that. And Beth, thank you for your time.
Thank you. That was a great pleasure.
And thank you, Beth, and thank you, Ben, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And yes,
YouTube channel if you want to see that, and any of the other 100 or so events that we've done, including Beth's interview with Kim from the shop, which was lovely. Thank you again. All have a good evening, and I'm going to watch Leeds v Liverpool now. Come on.